Stevens. I'm a faculty member here in the Graduate School of Education. I also work for the Vice Provost of Online Learning, and I get to welcome you to Education's Digital Future. How good is that? We are coming to the close of a 2-year conversation that has been hosted by the Graduate School of Education. Many of you have been familiar with this conversation. It's taken the form of a series of almost a dozen public forums, lively web presence, a series of courses, and the purpose of this enterprise has been to just facilitate as plural and cosmopolitan and iconoclastic conversations about digital learning at this really remarkable, turbulent moment in the history of higher education generally, and here at Stanford. This has been an effort that has included quite a few people. The co-conveners on the faculty side are myself, Candace Till, who will be here soon, she's not, and Roy Key, and basically just about every administrative unit of the Graduate School of Education has somehow been involved. Again, you may, it's nice to see many familiar faces, and I've been especially looking forward to this particular conversation. And the reason I've been looking forward to it is because we're at a moment at which places like Stanford that have long sort of thought of their primary business in some way as serving undergraduates who were early in the period of their adult lives, right, 18 to 22-year-olds, on their way to adulthood, are now at a moment where they are being expected by their alumni and friends, by the federal government, by the families who patronize them, to make themselves more accessible, more available than they ever have before. And this is not the first time that universities like Stanford have been called upon to do this. We did it before in the wake of World War II with the GI Bill, when the massive and rapid absorption of returning veterans really transformed pretty much every aspect of university life. Since that time, the division of labor among colleges and universities in the United States have meant that a very few organizations, one of them Stanford, when they've thought about undergraduate education, they've increasingly thought about 18 to 22-year-olds, whereas the warp and weft of colleges and universities in this country, community colleges and comprehensive state universities in particular, have taken the responsibility of serving adult learners. But that relationship, that division of labor, is being renegotiated at present. And it's being renegotiated for several reasons. One is, as the New York Times will tell you routinely, if you hadn't noticed, the baby boom is entering its golden years. And just like every other institutional domain that the baby boom moved through, old age is being transformed as well. I'm really happy about this because old age is going to be fashionable by the time I get there. So that's one reason why organizations like Stanford are being asked to think about adult learning and lifelong learning in new ways, because some of the largest populations of our own alumni are now at stage in life when they're asking Stanford to provide them with services in new ways. That's one reason. Another very important reason is that the life course itself has been pulled out. Some have argued that the journey to adulthood has gotten too long, and that in fact we may not be doing young people a service by continuing to help them imagine themselves as not adults for longer and longer periods of time. Of course, work has changed as well. So a sort of industrial era model in which one prepares for the workforce until one is 20-something, and then enters the workforce with some occasional retooling over the course of something called a career, which was presumed to be rather coherent and bounded by a particular occupational domain, doesn't really work anymore either. It's also the case that as we've made higher education more available to more and more Americans. We've realized that most Americans don't look like the unmarried, childless men and women that typically apply for admission to places like Stanford as undergraduates. And so, as we make college, have made college more accessible to a wider swath of the population, it's become ever more important to sort of think carefully about how to fit college into adults' lives rather than fitting lives into college. Again, our colleagues in community colleges especially exquisitely understand that, and we have a lot to learn from them. And part of what we're doing with these conversations is entering into conversations with our colleagues who have served different kinds of students for a longer period of time than we have. So it is truly by coincidence that my colleague and the Vice Provost for Online Learning, Amy Collier, today convened a meeting of administrators from various units across the university to talk about how the university might think about better serving learners over the course of their adult lives. It's not a coincidence that the Vice Provost for Online Learning is thinking about this at the same moment that we are, because there's clearly, as you will see from our presenters today, this is an idea whose time has come again with the advent of digital learning. In fact, digital learning is making it possible for all of us to think in fairly dramatic new ways about how educational opportunities and the character of adult lives might be renegotiated. So you will see very vividly from our presenters this evening just how much intellectual and creative possibility is being exploited at Stanford and elsewhere at the moment. So those of you who have been here before know the drill. We give the 10 minutes of opportunity to 4 presenters. I'll introduce them very briefly because you all have internet connections and you can search for them all on your own. I'll introduce them very briefly in the order in which they're going to be giving their remarks. They'll each come up and then sit down again, then we'll bring them all up after the 4th one, and then we'll have an open discussion until 7:30. Okay? Anything I didn't say? Anybody I didn't acknowledge? Any mistake I haven't made? Yeah? Okay. So our first speaker is Richard Setterston. He's the endowed director of the Hallie Ford Center for Healthy Children and Families at Oregon State University, an institute that he was instrumental in building into the significant institutional presence that it is today. He's a noted life course researcher and a good friend of mine. Wait. Oh. And then we'll hear from Susan Hoffman, who's the director of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at Berkeley. OLLI at Berkeley is the sort of is the hub of a national network of OLLIs. How many are there? 117. Throughout the United States. And many of you will recognize the Osher family as a benefactor to many public service endeavors here in the state of California. Delighted to have her back. Our third presenter is Sarah Stein Greenberg, who's the managing director of the Hasso-Lochner Institute for Design, otherwise known as the D.school, which has invested a good deal of talent and energy over the last year in a project called At Stanford that she'll be telling you about briefly. And then the 4th presenter is Phil Pizzo, who's the David and Susan Heckerman Professor and Professor of Microbiology and Immunology. And, as if that weren't enough, he's the founding director of the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute, which some of you may have read about, just launched last week or 2 weeks ago. And I'll let Phil tell you more about that.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rick Setterston, as Mitchell said, and I'm from Oregon State University. There we go. I'm kind of providing a bigger frame in some ways for the other papers you're about to hear, which are going to kind of fill up and bring to life some of the things and struggles that that we're talking about today. I want to talk about redesigning education. What's the life course got to do with it, and vice versa. I want to talk about a couple of sets of opportunities, and then I also want to talk a little bit about some problems to be solved if we want to work toward thinking about education in the life course and throughout the life course in new ways. The first point I want to highlight is this notion of a tripartitioned life course or a tripartite life course, basically in three boxes. Mitchell already alluded to it. A kind of front end where education is heavily front-loaded, and in the old model was thought about as being about preparation for work of a continuous full-time work box in the middle, and at the other end, retiring from work or the chance to have leisure. I mention this because we often hear comments that this thing is dead, and yet it's really not dead. It has for decades shown signs of erosion, but it's still very much a salient cultural frame, and it affects the choices that many individuals make, and it drives the kind of judgments we make about ourselves and about other people as they grow up and older. What we have seen is that the boundaries between those boxes have shifted more than we've seen a kind of takedown in that larger structure. On the front end, we've seen a much more slower course to adulthood. Of course, the widespread pursuit of higher education has also lengthened the front end. At the back end, we've seen extensions in longevity, and for what was for some time a trend toward earlier retirement, which made the middle period of work even smaller. Employment has become more discontinuous in the middle, and we are now seeing a much longer and less discrete transition to adulthood. I mentioned next that social policies and institutions actually really reinforce this. And so they can also be used in some ways to undo it. This is a structure that was, of course, fashioned in an earlier age. And when lives aren't in line with these kinds of expectations, people not only feel out of sync, but they're actively penalized for it. I've put this here again because to the extent that policies and institutions are kind of modeled on that three-box structure, we can also presumably use that to our advantage by reforming policies and institutions in a way that might help unlock the life course. Variability is also the reality of every period of life today. Old scripts for life are similarly beginning to erode, prompting new possibilities to create a life of your own, one that's much more in line with your own wishes and interests. But to be without a script, while it may be exhilarating and liberating, it's also risky as choices become heavier and also as outcomes become more uncertain. Every period of life today seems to be up for grabs, what it means to be young, what it means to be middle-aged, and what it means to be old, if we even admit to ourselves that we become old in the US. And age itself, as we know, research has shown us over and over that it's a poor predictor of individuals' social, psychological, physical, and cognitive statuses. Having time is also a new reality. Despite all of life's uncertainties today, a long life has become more certain. Longer life coupled with lower fertility mean that there's much more time in adulthood without active child rearing. A hallmark of early adulthood today, for example, is also that it's a period of life that's spent without a spouse. That too is a major shift. And we've not yet begun to realize the ramifications of what it means to have much larger numbers of people who remain permanently single and permanently childless. Being able to count on time is also quite different from being able to count on how it will be experienced. And late life is a good example of that. The later years are embodied with so much possibility, yet they're also so highly contingent on health, wealth, and other resources, which can quickly come undone and change the possibilities of the later years. Culture actually is also on our side. The US has some big master narratives about second chances in life, second or third or fourth acts. and the notion that it's never too late for anything and that age and aging can somehow be transcended.
You got a problem with that?
It's also a culture that places a premium on personal development, on exploration and reinvention, and all these things should in some way leave us receptive to the idea of lifelong education. And finally, hard economic times can prompt innovation in the life course. This is, of course, a topic that is a precious one for the last few years. It can create a new opening for new kinds of choices, for people to make new choices that they might otherwise not make. Higher education has an important role to play in responding to the discontinuity of lives today, both bringing new kinds of people into education and also education likewise presumably provides capital to help people weather hardship. I'm going to skip over this point. Now let me talk a little bit about some of the problems to be solved. If reallocating education across the life course demands a more flexible life course, then we have some serious problems in front of us. First is that flexibility in the life course cannot simply be the prerogative of the privileged. Having flexibility or having the ability to invest or reinvent yourself is a whole lot easier to do when you have resources. Resources also offset the risk of innovating life. But a flexible life course can't simply be for the privileged and lifelong education only for those who are already well educated. Or it simply deepens privilege and advantage. We have to somehow appeal to those who need education throughout life as much as those who are willing or able to take it up. A second point is that a flexible life course can't be seen as something to meet the needs, especially of working mothers. It has to be valued by and aspired to by men. It means valuing the kind of struggle that women have had in navigating education and work, which operate on a kind of linear time, and family life, which clearly does not. The different clockwork of institutions creates frictions and collisions as people make their way through them. Similarly, the adult life course cannot be seen as unisex. There is his adulthood and hers, and the two actually look quite different. I'm going to skip the point about insurance. How am I doing on time?
I don't know.
All right. All right. On the issue of gender, the problems of men. Many of the crisis storylines of adulthood today are carried by men or created by men. Low achievement, high school dropout, college unpreparedness, unemployment, being disconnected, that means you're not in school, work, or the military. High-risk sexual and social behavior, imprisonment, the list goes on, all about men. We have to figure out how to help men succeed in education, and we have to hope that education is also something that might help transform men. One barrier, an additional barrier, is that adulthood is still seen as being out of school. To be in school is to be not quite adult, or even a kid, a term I often hear administrators and professors use when they talk about students. They talk about kids. Most of us have tripped up in this way, but it's a revealing statement about who we think education is for. For those who are already in adulthood, the ability to be able to visualize yourself as a student seems an important first step. And to shed the idea somehow that going back to school is actually a step backward, right? Students of any age come with a matrix of relationships that can help or hurt or compete with their success. Those complexities only grow with age. Relationships are part of our choice sets. They affect what we're able to do or not do in life, and they affect how well we're able to do it. Those of us who are no longer young realize that adult life is anything but free. And if we're serious about lifelong education, we have to design institutions for students whose lives are messy, disorderly, untimely is a term we throw around a lot, and tangled up in family and other social relationships and obligations. This does not mean they're less than. Messiness does not mean less than.
Now you have 2 minutes.
Excellent, and I'm at the very end. Trying to find a bigger place for education in or throughout the life course is different from thinking about education for the life course. We know that the effects of education are not just about jobs and salaries. They're about a host of other things, including health, civic participation, and resourced parenting. The effects of college, however, are not only or as much about what happens in these 4 or 6 or 8 years, but about where college takes you later on. And it means responding to what are likely to be dramatically different sets of needs and a different kind of calculus for education in different periods of life. So finally, I want to, one final point, the mantra of investment in early childhood. I think this is an important point to make, because so much of the policy discussion on the Hill is about education, is about investment in early childhood, to the exclusion of discussions not only about education beyond childhood, but certainly beyond the transition to adulthood and into adult life. We have to make a strong case that public investments in education throughout adulthood are also worth making. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. You are a nuanced observer, much like your blogs that are on the internet. I want to begin with a thank you to Mitchell. I think, and to all of you associated with this fine university. I think that having the forum, recognizing the importance of learning over the life course is a powerful step forward. And it presents not only possibilities for each one of us, but also this university and for the culture, for us to really figure out how to empower people over a lifetime with the power of education, I think is an incredible thing. And I know for ourselves, we have conceived of the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute at UC Berkeley as a public space for people to return to the university, connect with the university, its intellectual and cultural resources, and also begin to sort of reimagine, retool, reengage their own lives. As Mitchell mentioned, Ollie at Berkeley is one of 117 Osher institutes across the country. Our particular Osher is designed a little differently than the others. We have an academic integration of our institute, which means that when the institute began 7 years ago, it was debated heavily within our academic senate whether or not we had the classroom space and, my God, the parking to accommodate a whole cadre of people from 50 years old to 100.
They let those people drive?
They let, yes. And now we have the trouble of not enough parking in downtown Berkeley, but that's another issue. So what happens right now is that Ollie at Berkeley is in the Vice Provost's Office of Teaching and Learning. And our administrative structure is under summer sessions, study abroad, and lifelong learning. And I think that this academic integration and this academic kind of profile is really important to what we do. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to explain a bit about Ollie at Berkeley's curriculum, its pedagogy, the learning community that we are creating. And let me just say that we don't call our people students, we call them members. And that is to underscore the real essentialness of creating a community. And I'm also going to discuss a little bit about the research that we're doing and just say a little bit about the digital future of lifelong learning. Each term, we produce a brochure. This is our spring brochure of 27 courses. Over the year, we will be offering 80 courses, 72 in Berkeley and 8 in Lafayette. We have expert faculty. Courses are taught by Berkeley faculty and other experts. And expertise is paramount since nearly 80% of our members, our 2,000 members, have advanced degrees. So it's a very different learning environment than others. We urge Berkeley faculty to use the classroom as an incubator, as a platform, as a way to launch some new thinking. We ask them to bring in their research, their book projects, and many of them do. We also ask the Berkeley faculty, bring your passion. We're not interested in what you've always taught. We want you to teach something you've always wanted to teach. So we have psychology professors teaching the psychology of opera, that kind of thing. The other aspect of our curriculum is that we've got a curriculum committee that consists of 12 members from our community. And those 12 members meet the prospective faculty. There's an interview process that goes on for 45 minutes. The faculty get a sense of who the members are, what animates them. It's also a way of understanding the expectations, the caliber, and for our members, it's a way for them to be better educated about the whole process of building a curriculum and understanding the subject matter. And in the end, it's great for the OLLI organization, because one of the things we're trying to do is establish mutual governance. And so on this curriculum committee, these members help make that decision. And then they also help with the whole marketing process. For us, very much word of mouth is instrumental. And so having those 12 curriculum committee members be able to say, look what's coming in 6 months, it gets that word of mouth going and that community established as well. This particular term, we're growing by 30%, and it is largely because of the word of mouth that gets created. We also say of our curriculum that it's forward-looking. I know sometimes people anticipate if you're serving a population of people from 50 to 100, maybe there's a lot of courses on history. Well, we do have a lot of courses on history, but the expectation is that they're going to be bringing some new understanding to history, some different perspective that has not been one that's been shared. It's also, we find that even among our oldest members, we have our fourth age salon is our over 80-year-old members that meet with me once a month. They say quite explicitly, we're interested in the future. We want to see how this is going to turn out. And they're not as interested as one might think about what's happened in the past. So forward thinking is very important. And being interdisciplinary is another important feature. And part of this is I think, because there is such a strong pattern recognition that happens with older adults, and the ability for them to take politics, economics, the arts, and sort of see their relationship. We have one of our faculty, Tamim Ansari, is going to be teaching a course that he's calling History's Ripple Effects, looking at the interconnectedness of history. Phenomenal course. He's a phenomenal thinker. The last 3 books he's written started as an OLLI class. He used the class as that way to think things through, the dialogue with the members. His agent loves us. The other thing then is we've got 12 parts in our curriculum so that there is, different areas depending on what your interest is, from science to the new curriculum area that we have right now is on sports. Because one of the things that we discovered around the gender difference is that we really needed to appeal to more men. Now, that sounds like that was gender stereotyping, but it's turning out that offering the sports curriculum is also bringing more men into our science curriculum, our arts curriculum, and others. And then what we do is we also design the curriculum so that it's keyed into the roles that older adults play. And as you see here, as citizens, mentors, consumers, investors, Robert Reich in 2009 and 2010 led us through the economic collapse, the recovery, and it was all keyed into how do people take this global understanding and be an actor in it. Then our pedagogy. I'm going to do this quickly. Intellectually stimulating, obviously. We're interested in older adults being able to use their executive functions. We want them to be active learners and interactive with each other. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of teamwork. There's a lot of dynamic learning. We also like it to be experiential, as you can see in this photograph. This is taken from the course that we had in the winter that was it was a collaboration between the College of Engineering and ourselves about designing for the future. And so we took people up to the lab and they were able to work with the engineers on a variety of projects. The other thing that's fairly important to us, very important, is being responsive to how older adults learn and what their needs are. And this very definitely is where we begin to explore what neuroscience is telling us about the importance of learning over the lifetime and of a kind of learning that helps to facilitate neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. And this is where we spend some time with our members, some in smaller groups, some in our larger classrooms. But here is my experiment. This is to show you what we have to be thinking about around activist learning. I noticed some of you are taking notes. Can you take the pen that you're holding and writing with and put it in your other hand? And now on your piece of paper, write your name. Go ahead, try it. Now, in the doing of that, I know some of you were a bit daunted at first. It's that feeling of challenge and cognitive uncertainty that we're after. So what we do is we urge people to take things that if their family saw that they were taking a course in some creative expression, they'd be wildly surprised. What? You, the scientist, the mathematician of the family? So we keep saying the real important thing is change up. Do something that's out of your habit of mind, out of character, and at least of the 3 courses you take with us during a term, take one that's like that so that you can really have that awkward, uncertain feeling that some of you had just now in using the pen in the other hand. There's also obviously a lot of use of technology, and there is a lot of member feedback. One of the things that we do is every course is evaluated by the members. And the use of technology, a lot is happening in that arena as well. Our learning community, we encourage our members to do peer-to-peer learning. So there's an opportunity for them to organize interest groups based on what they're learning in the classroom or things that they don't see happening in the classroom that they'd like to learn more about and are interested in helping to take a group of others along for that journey. We have a volunteer force of about 250 members that play all sorts of roles. The one part that's very important about older adults is to realize that for those who are retiring, that there's a loss of a kind of public portfolio or persona, and that this volunteering is a really essential part of reestablishing that portfolio. There are social aspects to what we do. If it's lunches with faculty, a whole range of things that are a part of the everyday part of our program. And then to mention that we are engaged in a fair amount of research. I won't have a chance to talk about much of it right now, but let me just say that it favors a methodology that is called participant observer, so that our OLLI members are helping to contribute to our understanding about learning, but also about learning. Moving on. The evaluation and research is the wing of our activity where we look at a couple of different issues, diversity and lifelong learning. This again is where the gender issue comes in, because the traditional lifelong learner is female, 65 to 75, and white. And so at Ollie at Berkeley, we're looking at how can we begin to diversify and have a more inclusive program. We're also discovering how much hearing is an issue. That almost 2/3 of people that are over 65, 90% of people over 80 have hearing issues. It is probably the most significant stumbling block to people continuing to learn. And when people have hearing impairment, there is a greater incidence of early onset of dementia. So we take the hearing very seriously, and we've got a national initiative with our other Ollie colleagues across the country. Learning and longevity, there is a connection between healthy aging and continuing to learn in a dynamic way. And I've mentioned to you before, and we have begun doing case studies of our older adults participating in MOOCs. We did one in the fall with the Coursera course called What a Plant Knows with our over 80-year-old members, and then the course that we just recently took, which I know, Mitchell, you guys did here as well, was from Duke University, the history and future of higher education. And that we're taking those case studies further, both at Berkeley and to colleagues on the East Coast, to imagine what do we really need to figure out about digital learning. And Dan Kamen is a Nobel Prize-winning energy scientist at Berkeley. We did our first online learning happened with the New York Times, where we did a course on energy and its sustainability. It was a very fascinating experiment. Unfortunately, neither the New York Times nor UC Berkeley were very good at marketing the online course, but we had a phenomenal global audience. And Dan Kamen in conversation by Skype, and the content was superlative. The other, as I've just mentioned, what we've done on MOOCs, and then there's a lot of other things to talk about what's possible around online learning. When we look at who is actually taking the MOOCs and staying with them, we're finding that a lot that they're lifelong learners, and they're people that are older with advanced degrees. The advantage of online learning is that people don't have to leave their home, but they can also reach a global audience. The accessibility issue for people hearing, visual, the closed captioning in these MOOC sites have been very important. And I think it is helping to address the digital divide and getting people to use the technology for something that they really want, which is ongoing learning. Thank you.
All right, so Mitchell, thank you so much for including me. I'm really excited to share some of the ideas that have come out of a year-long project that the D.school has taken on. And I should start by saying, actually, and some of you may know this, but although we're called the D.school, we are not a school and we don't teach formal design. So we are kind of an interdisciplinary school crossing at Stanford. We have students from all 7 schools who take classes with us. And this might give you a little bit of a clue that we tend to think in a little bit of an unconventional way, right down to our name. And we're really drawn to and fascinated by these kinds of complex problems and opportunities like the ones in higher education today. And so we launched this project this year because in this moment when there's so much interest and investment and some anxiety from the kind of coming disruption, the coming opportunities that are happening because of the education's digital future, we wanted to take a look and spend some time at the on-campus part of that. Not the online part, but the on-campus part. And what it's really going to mean in the future for a residential college experience, which may or may not continue to be like the overarching context in which people encounter some of the online learning. So in the course of this past year, we have run a number of classes with students, everything from freshmen to PhD students. We've engaged with faculty and with administrators from around the university and had some partnerships with parts of Stanford, like residential education and the libraries and the Vice Provost for Online Learning, and some external thought partners as well, one of whom is here today, helping us look at issues around accreditation. So I just want to call out Emily Goligoski from the Mozilla Foundation's Open Badges project. So what have we learned? So in the past year, we really started with very few preconceived ideas, and we asked our students to do what we call need finding, or some ethnography, both on campus and off campus. And from that, we have distilled a number of themes that have clearly become important as significant vectors for change in higher education. So I'm going to play a very short video that captures the themes that we really started with.
Stanford University. It's a place to come and gain expertise. And we get that expertise through some degree of classes and research. Classes take place in specific learning spaces and are bounded by constraints of time. But Stanford is more than expertise. It's also a place to have a coming of age. We make our way through this system through a combination of pre-prescribed majors and programs and some degree of learner agency. And we measure the success of everything through various forms of accreditation. This year, in the At Stanford project, we're excited to explore these themes in red. We're pushing the limits of what they are today through a series of experiments with both on and off-campus partners. This is all driving towards what is future Stanford.
All right, so that's where we were when we started this fall. And what I'm going to show you next is a sneak peek at the kind of provocations, the 4 major directions that we are going to share more broadly with the community at a couple of events in early May that I'll tell you about right at the end. But I want to just make the point that we really took the inspiration from what the students did in terms of understanding the Stanford context, and I don't want to say this is the future of higher education. This is very much inspired by the conditions and the students who we have here at Stanford. And also that this is the project team's point of view, not necessarily Stanford's point of view. So, yes, right. So our goal, our hope, is that we are going to inspire some real conversation, some strong feelings, whether they're positive or negative, and then hopefully some real experimentation around the ideas in here that do resonate with people and that do seem to be worthy of exploring further. All right, so here is our kind of the headlines of our kind of 4 directions. And I'm just going to very, very quickly share 3 of them and then go on and talk about the one that is most meaningful in the context of this conversation, which is really about when in our lives we want to learn and need to learn. So we have one idea that speaks to the opportunity that students need to really calibrate both the kind of learner that they are and what they want to focus on. And we see a lot of students who really start out at college either really hyper-focused on one particular major or actually kind of aimless, and they just are totally scattered and make decisions in a kind of haphazard way. And in some ways don't get what they could out of the college experience. And we kind of hear that echoed by faculty who say, actually, you know, there could be a higher percentage of the students in my classes who are truly intellectually engaged with the material, as opposed to this incredible fragmentation of attention and time that happens when you have so many opportunities at a place like this. And so there's some ideas around how could we actually break the mold of the 4-year progression, that kind of industrial model, and challenge that paradigm and create an opportunity for people to go at the pace that's right for them through an intentional process of calibration and then committing to a major and then trying out that major in real-world contexts. We have another idea that's about the kind of real deeper meaning behind learning. So how could we actually set students on a path that's not just about content and information and skills, but about purpose, about the actual reason that they want to learn a set of skills or take a set of classes or actually become accomplished in a discipline, and how we might inspire that kind of understanding and reflection in students and then give them an opportunity again to use some real world context to inspire that purpose. We have another idea, which is called Axis Flip, which is really about looking at the balance between skills and knowledge in the context of an undergraduate education. And this is something that Stanford and many other universities wrestle with periodically as times change. And from the start of Stanford, there's always been this sense of we want to have practical impact. We actually want to equip our students to be builders of industries and leaders of state. And so what does it mean in a moment when, from now until the future, there will always be access to information? So what does that mean for the role that skills could and should play, and how they should be foregrounded really in a college experience in the future? And so we're thinking about, if you think about skills now as kind of the dependent variable and kind of majors and disciplines as the independent one, what happens if we flip that, if we flip those axes? So the fourth area that we're looking at is this question of when over your life you might learn. And so we've called this idea open loop university. And it's inspired by actually many of the same themes that you've heard addressed already, which is, the dominant paradigm in higher education is you go to college from 18 to 22, you are kind of discouraged from making it take longer than that. The goal is to get through in that period of time. You're not a success, right? I remember when I was in college, there was like a joke about the people who were on the 7-year plan, right? And there's some real sense of you're not quite with the norm. You're not quite as doing what you're supposed to if you take time off in the middle. And then there's also problems around, how do we help people who are going to have longer professional lives and have more career changes over the course of their lives actually reinvest in learning new skills, new disciplines, connecting with what drives them at later times in their life. And I think, even just the spark of the idea that a lot of people look back at college as like the best time in their life, and that hunger for community and that need to connect and be part of a cohort, that doesn't disappear. But we have sort of we have some structures that address that, like alumni associations, but maybe there's an even more profound way to actually connect people. So the idea, as we're describing it, is what would an open loop university look like? Well, maybe when you apply and you get into college, you're not encouraged to have 4 years, that's all at the beginning of your life, but you are, or at the beginning of your adulthood, but you're given 6 years to distribute over the course of your life as you see fit. And you can do loops in the university and loops out of the university. So this might mean that we would need to have a stronger point of view about age-blind admissions. We might not favor applicants who were all in that 17 to 18-year-old range. And I think it might change how we think about that idea of taking time off. If we're encouraged to actually take 2 years here and then do a loop out and have a professional experience or do an internship or do some research, what would that then do when you come back to campus and you have more of that sense of purpose and an understanding and drive about why you're learning what you're learning? We can imagine that later in life, students would loop in at that moment of career pivot, at that moment of reflection, and then imagine what it would create on campus, this sort of vibrant diversity across ages, if we had folks who are in some of the classes that Susan was describing in some of our classes today at Stanford. It would be a challenge. We would definitely have to change some of our curricular approaches, but I think it could be a very interesting dynamic to introduce. And will be experimented with shortly. one of the things that I think would be really important is to acknowledge that mentoring and advising, I think, would be even more important than it is today. So we already know that students are overwhelmed by choice. If you're now having to think about, do I take a loop in? Do I take a loop out? How is this going to fit over my 6 years? I think that would raise the stakes for that kind of guidance. You need a coach, right? Exactly. Another idea that we're playing with is, if we were actually successful at shifting this paradigm, this idea that you should be starting, that there's this narrative of wanting to be successful and start at 18, what does that do in terms of actually opening the doors and building new pathways and on-ramps for students who are coming from a disadvantaged background? If there's more time and it's not as stigmatized that you don't start college right at 18. So that could be an interesting area to design for. And the last note on the slide is actually a question and an ask for help from all of you. So one of the things in creating this concept area that we've realized as a design team is that actually alumni, as we know it today, that term would go away. And instead of having 7,000 undergraduates, Stanford would have 215,000 somethings. Maybe they're members. Maybe they're lifelong students. I don't know what the name is, but I would say we are actually really open right now. This is a little mini design challenge. And if you have ideas or thoughts about that, I would love to hear them afterward. That would be really helpful. So the last thing I'll do is a shameless plug, which is invitation, which is to really encourage you to come and join us. We're going to be sharing these 4 ideas in much greater detail and in a much more interesting and exciting experiential way on May 1st and May 2nd. There will be a bit of a theatrical experience because we really want to ask the community to engage with these ideas and to see what that provokes and what kind of conversations have, and hopefully what kind of experiments ensue. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you there.
Okay. Well, I want to again thank you all for being here tonight, and thank Mitchell for inviting us. And as I was saying to myself largely, this has been a real learning experience already, because we've seen convergence and intersection of ideas that are happening spontaneously across institutions and programs that are really speaking to a future that stands before all of us. For me, personally, in an ethnographic way, I have to start by saying I am old. And I've crossed that line along with 10,000 people every day who are crossing the age of 65, which means that by 2029 we'll be through the baby boom bubble. But within just years after that, 20% of the population in the US will be greater than 65. So this is a real issue for all of us. And it comes at a time when our ideas appropriately about aging need to really be redefined. And I'm stopping using the words retirement and aging and thinking much more about life journey. And when I say that, I also recognize that many of the institutions we work with and for are still calibrating the life journey in periods of years. Generally age 60 to 65, and then it is obviously see you later, hopefully with dignity, but still see you later. And that's not a good plan for the future. I don't think it's a good plan for this nation. And so I'm thinking a lot about how we can change that. And as I alluded to earlier, for me, the beginning of that plan started when I was early in my training 4 decades ago and watched people at that time who missed the signals of when they might transition to something else and wound up hanging on, if you will, too long in an area and venue. And I said to myself then, when I got to that stage, I was going to pursue something entirely new and different. My plan was actually to do a PhD in history as a venue for the future, because I have long felt that starting new things and new opportunities is important in terms of personal recalibration and transformation. It opens new neural networks. It allows us to think about the future in uniquely different ways. And as you've heard from all of our prior speakers, the role of universities really do need to rethink their roles into the future as well. And coupled with that, and here I'm putting on my physician side, former dean of medical school side, to say that I think if we do this carefully and well, we can change the public health in significant ways. If people are inspired to continue to look to the future, that may perturb and alter the onset of chronic ailments and changes which in some ways impact us individually and societally and alter, if you will, even the cost of the life journey into the future. So we, after almost a year of internal concept planning, like in a startup, being out and meeting with over 200 faculty and leaders here at Stanford, announced just 2 weeks ago the establishment of what we're calling the Stanford Distinguished Careers Institute. And this graphic shows you how this experiment is configured, but I want to elaborate a little bit further on it with you and share with you how we've put it together, and immediately say, before I even get into those details, that to me the success of this is not simply what we do at Stanford, but whether or not we're able to promote with colleagues across the country a new narrative about higher education that really promotes this down to universities, colleges, community colleges, and the like. Having come from a working class family, first in my family to go to high school, I think that there is a lot of opportunity that applies not to those just who've had a privileged life, but those who have lives that need to be lived with dignity and quality. So the program that we've put together has a number of different components. They're all outlined here on this circle and elaborated a bit further on this graphic. And so what we're planning is the following, that we will be admitting, we're actually in the application receiving mode now, as of 2 weeks ago, and finalizing this by summer, 20 individuals who will have had established careers of excellence. We're looking for people who want to be givers rather than takers, people who are interested in personal transformation for the good, who want to use their experience, whether it's been in business, law, finance, science, whatever walk of life they've been in, and are interested in taking on a challenge and moving into new directions. The opportunities are to think about things in terms of individual exploration and discovery, and learning and connecting in community. Much as you've heard, part of the opportunity of being at college is forging a new community. And while online learning has wonderful attributes, it doesn't forge a community in the same way. So the community building activities that we're looking at are for our 20 fellows to spend time together in faculty fellow dialogues. We've put together a proposal. You can see this online. It's at dci.stanford.edu. And the model courses are all shown there, and they cover a wide panoply of topics because we believe that whether you're interested in business or science or education, you'll learn a lot from a discourse in Roman history or other topics. We're interested in a transformation series in which individuals will share their life journey but learn more about transformation from new venues, from the venue of an orchestra leader and other perspectives. We're interested in think tanks that bring people together for deep dives into certain topics, and of course, we're very interested in intergenerational learning. The opportunity to pair wisdom with early learning and attributes of fact-finding offers brand new venues and opportunities for thinking about the future, and I'll comment on that in a moment. We're interested in social networking, bringing people together and then continuing the dialogue after this year-long journey ends for each subsequent year that follows, and connecting them to new cohorts and ideally to new institutions as they unfold, and having them spend time together in a dedicated workspace. And thankfully, the law school is providing that space for us to house our DCI fellows. On an individual level, every one of our fellows will be able to audit courses throughout the university in areas that they've already been interested in or new things that they've never explored before. There will be a series of scholarly pathways. I'll show you a little bit more about this in just a moment, who will be guided by senior faculty members from throughout the university, serving as road guides and enablers to allow them to be successful. Because I deeply believe that the life journey is enhanced by personal and physical health, There'll be opportunities for physical and cognitive, if you will, recalibration and adjustment. Wellness that enables endurance through the life journey that will be coupled with transition counseling, placement, and opportunities for the future. Stanford is an amazing place, as you all know, with over 36 interdisciplinary institutes and centers. We've visited with every one of them. Quite amazingly, every director that we met with when we presented this concept was enthusiastic about having one or more of our fellows join into their center. If you look on the website, you'll see that there are individual centers and institutes under each of these aggregated topics: arts and the humanities, business, leadership, entrepreneurship, education, teaching and learning, and throughout. And we've brought together in blue a group of senior faculty. For those of you who know the Stanford community, these are among the very best from all schools who are willing to shepherd one or two fellows on an individual basis through the course of this year. We think that that will allow us to be able to utilize the university in a new way, to create a discourse and narrative in a new way. We learned along the way, as one does, just as I've learned tonight about new programs being established here and at Berkeley and at Oregon, that Harvard started a program in 2008 called the Advanced Leadership Initiative, which does some of the things that we're talking about here, but with a slightly different angle. It's much more of a case-based business school model. This is meant to be a more holistic personal transformation model and an opportunity for research. We want to understand how programs like this change individuals and collectively change society as we move forward. This experiment is about transforming yourself and the world and represents Stanford for Life. So thank you very much for allowing me to share this with you tonight.
So clearly this is a university with modest ambition. We all do that. It's humility, you. And boy, are we having a good time. So could I ask the four panelists to come up?
Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm a master's student in the POLS program, Policy, Organization, and Leadership Studies at the GSE. And I had a question actually directed at the D.school. I was curious throughout designing the loop of Stanford in the 6 years, have you thought about what evaluation would look like and how funding sometimes is tied to evaluation? So if you could expand a little bit on your model.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that this idea makes us wrestle with is, like, what would happen? Would you get a diploma, right? What's the future of the transcript? And that kind of idea is already, I think, being looked at in a number of different ways. So there's actually another one of our four ideas where we have done a little bit more depth around this idea of grading and accreditation. And there are some interesting experiments going on at Stanford as well. So there's an experiment afoot around a portfolio approach instead of a transcript. I think that this is an area where it's not clear what that future will be, but the idea that we are essentially kind of tabulating, the hours that one is in a seat in a classroom, and then a metric around performance that's based on kind of the model of cramming and kind of short-term retention. I mean, I think all of those things are kind of up for discussion and design right now. I think that one of the interesting things that we've heard from faculty as we've been testing this idea of what could replace grades or transcript, and are we ready to move to that, is just a sense from experienced faculty that they know what it looks like when a student has mastery. And how that changes someone's demeanor in a classroom and the kinds of projects that they tackle. Mm-hmm. And so we do have, I think, a reliance on some things that make our lives more easier in from an operational perspective, but maybe are not as tuned to those sort of like human learning processes.
Do others want to respond to that? What evaluation looks like? Could look like, shouldn't look like, mustn't look like.
Well, I know for us at Berkeley, what we do is it's a lot of surveys and course evaluations that everybody fills out and followed by, the traditional focus groups and, a way of assessing it from a variety of vantage points.
In the life journey path, I think it's important to think about other metrics as well. So I mentioned the Harvard program. That has a very definite outcome. So if you enter into that program, you need to have a project that you're going to work on for the year, and it's an expectation that you'll move that forward. That's great if you've already got an idea in mind, but many of us get to a certain point in our lives when we're transitioning where we're not so sure what we'd like to work on. And so I think that, to me, a very viable metric is, has someone undergone a kind of personal transformation, a personal renaissance that allows them to be a better citizen in their community? Do they think about things in different ways? Are they enablers? Do they forge new territory, open new doors? So I think we want to be thoughtfully creative. I mean, we've been, as those of you who are more expert than I in education parameters, not get altered by the overuse of metrics that have defined certainly early childhood education.
I want to continue with the point that Lauren raised too, and connect it to something that Rick said. I mean, these certification moments are deeply baked in, not only to individual identities, but let's face it, to parental identities, right? So my child is a high school graduate. My child is a college graduate. She did graduate at the right time, in the right place, with the right people. She has a major. She is finished. I am done with my responsibility for the education of this young person. So, I mean, it's fun to think outside the box and everything, but we've organized a great deal of contemporary life around something called a college degree. And last I checked, people line up around the corner in order to acquire something called a Stanford college degree. So what do we do with that expectation as we build this brave new world?
So it is a kind of collision course in the sense that the parental investment in children has grown. It's not just about the cultivation of little kids, but it's the cultivation of grown-up kids too. And this is also not a new phenomenon. Some of the best economic data we have in front of us show that actually, as of the 1980s,
Thanks, Chris.
a third of the cost of raising a kid to the age of 18 came again in the 20s, right? And so this was as of the 1980s. This is not a new thing. It reflects the fact that, so as frustrated as we may at times be with the new kinds of students before us, they don't come out of the blue. I mean, new kinds of parents also create new kinds of kids. And actually the degree to which young people and their parents are close and connected today is actually, in my view, a very positive shift. But it does create a sense of pressure around what is it that's supposed to be going on in the 20s and how long am I as a parent actually obligated. The most
Am I going to be paying Stanford tuition forever?
But I think the
Only for 6 years.
But the most remarkable shift is that our newest data, this is some of this is coming out of, I was part of the MacArthur Foundation network on the transition to adulthood, and some of the best new data we have show that actually parents are now basically tithing for their adult kids. They're spending about 10% of their annual incomes to support young people, but it's through their 20s. Of course, much of that investment comes in the early. Much of it comes in the early 20s. But I think what you have, there are two important notes to make in that sense. One is that 10% of $200,000 is totally different from 10% of $20,000, and so the fact that you have this kind of uniform tithing still reflects a great deal of inequality. At the same time, what I will say that's remarkable and new is that low-income and poor parents are also tithing. This is a new phenomenon. They caught on to the fact that in order for their kids to be successful, they have to find a way to continue making investments in their kids well after they've turned 18. And I think that this is a game changer in a way. But it's and the economic turn in the last few years has also placed a great deal of strain on families in the process and figuring out how to make good decisions about college, not just about where you go and how much it costs, but what a college degree gets you today, and a question of whether the payoff will be there.
Mm-hmm. I think it's very fair, the point about new kinds of parenting creates new kinds of kids. And one faculty member at the D.school has had to create a policy that parents are not permitted to attend his office hours to discuss their child's performance, which I think is a new kind of rule that he's had to make. But I think there's another piece too, which is that this university, as well as all of our peer institutions, in the way that we structure our admissions process, we are creating the funnel, we're creating the process that parents and high schools are designing their experiences around in that pre-college time. Mm-hmm. And so I think actually we do have some responsibility for for that new paradigm that's happening in terms of that intense involvement and that push for students to achieve at the highest levels and beyond and jump through all of those hoops, as opposed to cultivating a greater sense of their own passion and what they might best suit them as learners.
So I think these are great points. A couple of, by way of example, analogy. So I think all of us agree that investment in education early in life is critical and essential. All of us are the beneficiaries of that. It's a little bit like Social Security in a different perspective that I want to make as well. So when Social Security was formulated in the 1930s, it was based on an actuarial model that you were going to live about 3 years and then you die. And so the investment made a lot of sense at that point in time. Well, the world has changed. And it's not, of course, just in the US, it's a global phenomenon. And people are living, we talk about the baby boomers, but I'm way beyond in my thinking the baby boomers. That's a sort of immediate issue, but I'm thinking 2050, 2090, 3000, the world will have us living for a longer period of time. There'll be a biological endpoint for sure. Our biology will run out. But as we are now beginning to face, as I look around the room, there are young and people maybe somewhat contemporaneous with me. And, if you are contemporaneous with me, you're thinking about, well, if I, went and did my job and worked and got, anticipated my retirement, do I have enough that's going to last for as long as I'm going to last? That's a big deal, right? Because many people, planned and saved for, work that was going to go on into their 70s. Now you're living 80, 90, and beyond. So I think the reason that these issues about reformatting, re-engaging, re-educating, reprogramming are investments that really need to reap value over the course of 20 or 30 years that comes after your first career path is ended. Learning today gives you about a 20 to 30 year run rate. If you look at, as I said earlier, most lawyers, are any lawyers in the room? Well, as I've explored this, most law firms, by the time you reach 60, are getting ready to move you on into different venues. Right?
I'm actually going back for my master's in education here.
There you go.
I started
An affirmation.
retooling.
So I mean,
And she's not 60.
There are defined endpoints in law. Think about my area of medicine. We've got to grapple with the fact that at a certain point, just like for pilots, it may not be a good idea for people to be practicing technically sophisticated areas, forever, so to speak. If you're in other areas, the MBA programs that produce people in finance and banking, their careers are ending at a much earlier stage. What happens to that human capital? How do we harvest that in ways that are good for our society? And so I think that's why this narrative, this dialogue, however we do it, opens up a new pathway that really could have big impact on society.
Good evening. I'm David Brazer. I'm the director of the POLS program, the joint degree. And I want to try to make a comment that ties together, that reflects some of the ideas that you were triggering in my head. Let me tell you a little bit more about my background. I have 4 children, 2 are in college. And I am the sort of informal advisor to a freshman here, in addition to advising 35 POLS students and some joint degree students and all that. So I'm seeing a lot of different angles on education. The thing that strikes me particularly strongly between the eyes coming to Stanford is how little students are focused on their coursework at times. And then I think about my son who's in the architecture program at University of Virginia, and he's 20, and he's straining at the constraints. He really wants to work. And so I think this loop model has huge potential for sort of just-in-time education.
Yeah.
My 20-year-old would like to spend a year working in an architecture firm, and all he gets is summer internships.
Yeah.
The freshman I'm working with wants to be an entrepreneur and develop a product, and he could take his freshman level information or knowledge and go and do that, and then and each of them could then return to their respective universities when they have a need. The need that I felt in graduate school, I had been teaching for 3 years. I came here and I was just hungry for coursework in a way that I never was as an undergraduate. So then I think there's just gigantic potential there. But then there's this question about funding and parenting and all that sort of stuff. And what hit me was, I don't want to go to office hours with my kids. That's the last thing I want to do. And I'm eager to become financially free of them for a lot of reasons, but I'm happy to fulfill my fatherly duties to pay for their education. So here's what I propose. You get into a college or university at age 18, and you pay the full freight. You pay 4 years of tuition to be used at any time over the next 20 years. That way, Dad's free. I've opened the vein, and I'm done. And my kid gets to use that investment in the way that he or she thinks is appropriate, and the university fulfills their obligation up to a certain level with our having paid tuition. All of a sudden, it feels very doable. One last thing, I promise to give this up. Your comment about how we feel about my kid being a graduate and what my kid gets, I know that that's powerful, but I think that you could incentivize parents to think differently, and it would be okay, especially if their kids became more independent.
That's great.
I have a hand that I'm responding to. Next. Cue.
Whoa.
Still here.
Hi, my name's Brian Murphy. I'm having an odd reaction to some of this. I'm very much resonating to some of the comments you made about the opportunities and the barriers, right? Because I work at an institution that's defined by looping at De Anza College, a community college. One of the things that characterizes the obvious class difference that animates much of this conversation is the absence of resources or the dependency on public resources for the vast majority of our people. And as a matter of public policy, the state of California has explicitly declared that lifelong learning is not a priority and will not be funded. So that I have been directed to limit the enrollment of older adults in what we call single course taking. So you're talking 400,000 Californians no longer enrolled in the California community colleges who were dependent upon those schools for whatever version of program could be put together. Some very mindful, none of them with the robustness of what Ollie does at Berkeley or what you might be proposing to do here, but often patched together, but nonetheless capable of being supported. What we learned from that was the narrative that worked politically privileged the young. The way you win politically is to act as if the investment in the young is the primary investment. So from a political perspective, the research that you might do, just as the research that could happen at Berkeley, that could demonstrate the cost benefit of an ongoing investment in learning for older adults, at least in the current currency of politics, could give us a chance of having an argument at a much more global level than individual programs could. So What I would encourage, and we're obviously seeking allies, is that to the degree over the next 5 years we can learn something about the public health benefits and cost benefits of this, even though we are secretly animated by an entirely different humanistic view of what it's actually about, right, which is your argument.
Right.
But even though that's secretly our argument, we got to have this other currency in order to play in the other game. But the begging I would do is that among the other transformations one might imagine of, for instance, particularly Stanford, where you're talking about people who were successful in these fields, is for them to also think of themselves in the next passage of their lives as political organizers. They have to think of themselves as our allies.
Absolutely right.
Because if they see themselves simply as reinventing themselves as independent entrepreneurs again, they will once again leave us behind.
Yeah.
And we need the allies, we need the help.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of begging two things, which is that the research be very mindful about its political impact, its potential political currency. And secondly, that we start making alliances across these boundaries.
Yeah.
I wrote down a note to myself, Stanford DCI, link to DeAnza, question mark. I have no clue what that would look like, but wouldn't it be fun to try to experiment with it?
Well, you know, I've been to, thank you very much. I just want to make a quick response. I couldn't agree more strongly with what you stated. And I've already had discussions with Bernadine Fong, who used to be the president at Foothill in Dianza, and we'll be meeting with the Carnegie Group specifically about this. Because I think unless there are connections between universities and community colleges around the country that really respond to local needs in meaningful ways, we'll lose the opportunity. What I'm going to be telling the fellows who join us next January is that they are going to be pioneers and ambassadors. They need to help create the new ways of thinking about doing good for the society. That's really the goal. And you framed it beautifully. Thank you.
One more.
I'm Suzanne Harris, and I just was responding to this idea of paying the whole thing at once, the tuition, and let them go back. Harvard actually has a program like that for in connection with the Boston Ballet. It affects very few students, but if you are a member accepted into the Boston Ballet Company and Harvard will let you, if you go for 6 months, finish any time the rest of your life.
Wow.
So it's a tiny sample, but they're starting it.
Thank you.
All right, so I am going to, it is 7:30, so, and we do end on time here, around here. I want to say, I intimated at the beginning, first of all, thank this panel for the spectacular discussion. Obviously, it will be ongoing. You have been warned. I hinted at the beginning that we were nearing the culmination of education's digital future. The program, as it's conceived, will conclude at the end of this quarter. We have one more panel on the 13th of May called, perhaps appropriately in light of the way the conversation has turned, Whose Digital Future, right? What kind of users are we building the digital future for? Who will pay for the digital future? Who will make the rules for the digital future? And the reason we're culminating is because in a very important sense, the purpose of this enterprise was to give this Stanford and its neighbors an opportunity to sort of get ready for the next phase of this tumult that we are undergoing. And I think that I think it's fair to say that education's digital future has at least played a modest role in helping the university and its neighbors get ready for its next chapter. Those next chapters are well under production. You'll be hearing about their unveilings over the next several months. So, so this particular sequence of activities will conclude, but it's really just a bridge to a whole bunch of activity that will almost certainly be ongoing. So thank you for another rich conversation, and we'll see you on May 1st and May 2nd, and you'll get an announcement about May 9th, and then you'll get something about May 13th. So we're not finished with you yet. Thanks again.